Hi, I'm Jenny Zhang, and I'm here at Waterstone's Gower Street, and I wanted to share with you some of my favorite books that were influential to me just as a writer and also in writing my book, Sour Heart, which is out from Bloomsbury, and it's a collection of short stories. The first book I wanted to talk about was Portnoy's Complaint by Philip Roth, which I know is very controversial. There's, obviously like a dirtiness to this book. It's written from the perspective of Portnoy, who's kind of ranting and raving throughout the book, and it's this kind of extended dialogue, or extended monologue rather, where Portnoy is talking about everything, sex, family, the overwhelmingness of coming from a Jewish family and having a Jewish mom. But there's also like a lot of tenderness, like there's a lot of like scatological talk, and there's a lot of talk about masturbation and about like sort of filthy sexual fantasies. But I think at the end and the core of this book is sort of just this, I don't know, very confused, genuine young man who's kind of like desperately groping for his identity and his place in the world and like a way to feel calm and happy. It felt like all the provocations came from a genuine place. And I started to realize in reading this book that profanity and depravity, that's also, it's a literary form, just as minimalism or poetry or beauty or lyricism is, and that there is a lyricism in profanity. And so I took a lot of permission from this book because, well, my book has a lot of profanity, so I guess I wanted to take this as my model. And my book also has a lot of tenderness, and it's also a lot about family, which this is as well. And I wanted to be just as funny and vulgar as Portnoy and Philip Roth. So the next book is Pastoralia by George Saunders, and I love this cover. I've never seen it before. George Saunders is an amazing American writer who has written primarily short stories, and he just came out with his first novel. Again, this was like another revelation for me, and it was very influential for me because I was writing short stories, and I was having a really hard time writing a longer work of fiction, like a novel. And I love also that George Saunders will write these long short stories. The title story, Pastoralia, it's almost novella length. It's a little bit too short to be a novella and a little bit, too long to be a short story. So I took inspiration from that as well, because I'm always writing in these forms that are purely terrible for the market. And I love that there's this almost like anti-capitalistic streak in George Saunders, both in the form that he writes in and the situation he writes about. And I found him to also be really exciting because he's somewhere between speculative fiction and literary realism, where it's not quite science fiction, but it's not really just straight realism either. It's kind of this new undefinable category. My favorite story in here is the story called Sea Oak, which is about this family who lives in some pretty dire straits. They're living in a pretty terrible, violent neighborhood, and they're very poor. And it's these siblings who live with their Aunt Bernie, who is like the ultimate martyr. I think the best present she ever got was when she got 2 pencils one time for her birthday. And she took a bus once to Atlantic City. But while she was out getting food, 2 thieves broke into her hotel room and took a dump in her luggage. So, she's had a very terrible life. And in the story, she dies suddenly. I think these intruders break into her home, and she dies of fright. And it's this really funny story because in the story she comes back to life. She's kind of this living zombie. And in her afterlife, she's crude. She wants to have sex. She reveals that no one ever touched her, that all she wants to do is get a nice bra and go out and meet young hot guys. And she's bitter in the way that she wasn't when she was alive. She's full of this rage of like, why did I have to have such a terrible life? And in her living life, she never complained. And it causes her nephew and her nieces to kind of take another look at their lives and wonder, like, why? Like, why do some people have everything and some people have nothing? And that's a question that is asked throughout the story. And I think I modeled a lot of my stories after George Saunders, even though I don't, write speculative fiction and there are no zombies in my book. All right, so my final book is by Roddy Doyle. I love this cover. It's Patty Clark, Ha Ha Ha. I don't know why or how I picked up this book. I think I liked that it said Ha 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 on the cover. It was like a funny title, and I liked how scrappy the kid on the cover was. There was so much mischief, and I was always looking for books about children that were not for children. I think partly because my stories are all about children, but they're for adults, and I found that hard to find for a while. And also the stories about children that I read that were for adults and were considered literary fiction, I think sometimes the children would seem a little precious or a little idealized, and I was looking for something a little rougher, a little more subversive, something that believed in childhood as this capacious time where children are neither angels nor devils. I think I read it like in a day. It was just incredible. Children don't even know sometimes that what they're doing is vulgar, or that what they're doing is precocious, or what they're doing is innocent. And he captured that very coming of age really beautifully. And I think early on in this book, Patty Clark, he gets into all of these like scrapes with his brother, and I think at some point someone like lights someone's mouth on fire, and I just was like, those are the children I know. The children I know, they're not really that sweet. They're actually, I feel like I grew up with almost like these homicidal maniacs sometimes. They weren't really homicidal maniacs, but it's just more like when you're a child, you're constantly testing out the power you have, and you're constantly testing out the power you have over others and the power other people have over you. I think because being a child is essentially a power dynamic, because it's the only time in your life where you are completely reliant on adults, and they have the power to care for you, and they have the power to abandon you, and they have the power to destroy you, and they have the power to shape you. Roddy Doyle really tests our patience for these kids, because some of them do pretty terrible things, and they're pretty violent, and they bully each other. But he also makes you just really love them and root for them, and he shows on the other side of violence is helplessness, and I loved that about this book. I don't know, it was a book that stayed with me, and it was a book that I aspired to write, one that treated children as completely worthy subjects of literary and serious inquiry. So thank you for coming with me on this journey of my favorite books.